Hey, Andrew.
I am after you.
Okay. Am I throwing to you?
I think you are. Yep.
Okay. Here's the order. The order will be myself, Chip, Bobert, Biggs, Norman, Rosendale, Clyde, Bishop, Donald, Cloud, self, and followed by Q&A.
Wait a minute. Who am I after?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Good afternoon to all of you. We're here to let you and the American people know that Speaker McCarthy had a mandate from the American people, negotiated with the powerful negotiation position of a unified Republican Party, not only just in the House, but in the House and the Senate, to hold the line for the bill that we passed. This deal that we've heard about totally fails to deliver on all of it. And if you want to get into the details, let's just start with the IRS. 87,000 new IRS agents, all the billions of dollars, $1.4 billion cut, leaving the balance to be used by the IRS immediately, starting at this moment, continuing on for the duration of this presidency. $4 trillion at least, an unlimited debt ceiling increase. Unlimited debt ceiling. And oh, by the way, puts the incoming president, whether that's Joe Biden or whether that's a Republican, having to deal with it in a lame duck session. Absolutely and completely unacceptable. Trillions and trillions of dollars in debt for crumbs, for a pittance, every single thing. Take the student debt bailout, the student loan forgiveness. Biden forgives, you pay. None of that changes. Take the assault on American energy with the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. All of those subsidies killing American energy, continued unbridled. The permitting reform, all it does is seeks to increase and impose more of the Green New Deal faster on the American people. Faster. Now, at least $4 trillion in debt for nothing, from the strongest position a Republican has had generally, and certainly our elective lifetime here, and generally probably since we've been paying attention to politics. The Speaker himself has said on numerous occasions, the greatest threat to America is our debt, and now is the time to act. We had the time to act. And this deal fails completely. And that's why these members and others will be absolutely opposed to the deal, and we will do everything in our power to stop it and end it now. And with that, I introduce the gentleman, Mr. Roy.
Well, I thank Chairman Perry. I thank my friends here who have been for a long time making clear to the American people that it's time for things to change in Washington. Now, we've been saying that for a long time, and finally in January we did something about it. And we forced a change, and the American people responded. And for 5 months, that change was being seen. Because we were a unified Republican Party standing up for the things that we actually run on. Actually trying to change this place. Actually trying to secure the border. Actually saying that if you're going to raise the debt ceiling, maybe you should actually enact fiscal reforms to do so. We did that. We worked in good faith. Everybody's sitting around, working around the table to accomplish the objectives the American people sent here to do. Unfortunately, last week, there was a breach. There was a breach in the structure that we agreed to put in place to make sure that we were representing the American people through this heretofore United Republican Conference. The Republican Conference right now has been torn asunder. And we are working hard to try to put it back together again this weekend by making sure that this bill gets stopped. I want to be very clear. Not one Republican should vote for this deal. Not one. If you're out there watching this, every one of my colleagues, be very clear. Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal. No one sent us here to borrow an additional $4 trillion to get absolutely nothing in return. But at best, if I'm being really generous, a spending freeze for a couple of years. That's it. That's about what you get. And frankly, you're going to make things worse, and my Democratic colleagues know it. That's why they're supporting it. That's why they're going around gleeful. Look, there's a reason our Democrat colleagues support this. There's a reason that Mitt Romney supports this. There's a reason that Bill Kristol supports this. It's all the same stuff. There's a reason that our conservative allies are opposing it roundly. The Club for Growth, scoring against it. The Heritage Foundation, scoring against it. Freedom Works, scoring against it. Ron DeSantis, publicly opposed. President Trump said he thought we should default rather than pursue this kind of lunacy. At the end of the day, the only person that would default in this town is Joe Biden, unless Republicans default on the American dream by voting for this bad bill. That is why this group will oppose it. We will continue to fight it today, tomorrow, and no matter what happens, there's going to be a reckoning about what just occurred unless we stop this bill by tomorrow. I yield to my friend, Ms. Boebert.
So we're here today in strong opposition of the latest so-called deal to lift the debt ceiling. As far as I'm concerned, I think McCarthy did the best that he could do to some extent with this deal, but we made it clear at the outset of this Congress that we would not continue business as usual here in Washington, D.C. McCarthy did his job, but unfortunately Biden and the Democrat-controlled Senate did not do theirs. The House did our job. We passed a bill. We passed a decent bill. None of us wanted to increase the debt ceiling. But we came together and said if we can make some fiscal reforms and some cuts that actually make sense to the American people, then we're willing to do that rather than go into default. And now we must, again, in the House, do our jobs. I think that there should be a process that's discussed to have an open rule and offer amendments. And we're going to go over those things. We're going to see what is best for the American people in that. But we fought extensively to empower each individual member of Congress to have a say, to have influence on legislation, not unilaterally give our authority over to the Speaker to negotiate a bad deal. The American people are struggling with high gas prices, groceries, and other monthly expenses that were fueled by Democrat federal spending sprees that cause record inflation that we are still fighting today. The bill passed by House Republicans provided a modest $1.5 trillion increase to the debt ceiling in exchange for enacting pro-policies and real spending cuts. Our bill saved taxpayers $4.8 trillion and included real reforms. We had substantive policy included in the Limit, Save, Grow bill. We had a real opportunity to significantly cut federal spending, restore some fiscal sanity to Washington, D.C., and get our economy back on track. Unfortunately, the bill we are considering tomorrow does none of these things and is more Washington gimmicks from the swamp that kicks the proverbial can down the road. Tomorrow's bill hands Biden a blank check as it doesn't actually set a debt limit. This is an unlimited debt increase, allowing him to spend as much money as he wants through the end of his term. Tomorrow's bill fails to return federal spending to pre-COVID pandemic levels and instead normalizes federal spending at the $6 trillion level as opposed to the previous $4 trillion level. That is $2 trillion more that we will likely spend each year because of this disastrous anti-deal. Tomorrow's bill allegedly cuts $41 billion. I think it's more like 12, which is essentially nothing, as its estimated savings from the bill from unspent COVID funds. These so-called pay-as-you-go wins in the bill are fake. It allows the OMB director to ignore this mandate whenever she deems necessary to do so. This administrative pay-go isn't as lovely as it sounds, as this administration can waive that whenever they'd like. Republicans said we're going to defund Biden's new army of IRS agents. Yet this bill prohibits only $1.4 billion of that $80 billion. So at the end of 10 years, okay, the IRS has $1.4 billion left to spend. They can still spend the rest of that money however they so choose to attack the American taxpayer, middle-class taxpayers that the IRS will be weaponized against. And shockingly, in tomorrow's bill, there are no actual budget caps required after 2025. Only non-enforceable appropriations targets. CBO's estimate of $2.1 trillion in cuts that everyone is touting will never materialize because there is nothing real in this bill to enforce. In short, tomorrow's bill is a bunch of fake news and fake talking points that will do nothing to rein in out of control federal spending. If every Republican voted the way that they campaigned, they would vote against tomorrow's bad deal because this is the very thing that we all campaigned to put an end to. I yield to my former chairman, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you, Representative Boebert, and thank you, Chairman Perry, for organizing this, and I'm thankful to my colleagues who are here speaking about this ridiculous, ephemeral deal. And thank you to those of you who are here from the press and those back home who are watching. So, you know, I didn't vote for that last deal, okay? I didn't do it because there's $1.5 trillion, and I just said, you know, that's probably more than I can go. But I'll tell you what I see here in this deal is absolutely one of the biggest abominations since I've been in Washington, D.C. The original bill that passed out last month promised 2022 spending levels with a savings of about $131 billion and rescissions of almost $900 billion. Think about that. That's what the House passed out just a month ago. And you're asking the House now to do something different, completely different. The McCarthy-Biden plan nets only $9 billion in actual savings and $29 billion in rescissions. But even that $29 billion is false. It's false. The likelihood that the savings totally goes away, and the bill indicates that the $22 billion of the rescissions will be proposed, they're going to be used to get around the so-called spending caps. That's what's devised here in this plan. The McCarthy-Biden plan blows up the debt ceiling from the already outrageous national debt of $31.5 trillion to be more than $36 trillion by January 1st, 2025. But they couldn't even be honest about that because the McCarthy-Biden deal is designed to actually fool you. Instead of estimating the actual debt ceiling that will be imposed by that date, January 1st, 2025, they simply say that will be the date. There'll be an unlimited cap. There won't be a cap for 19 months of the Biden administration. And the Biden administration is probably the most profligate administration we've seen. And that's saying something. While the current growth rate of our national debt projects to slightly more than $4 trillion in new debt, I forecast for you now it's going to be closer to $5 trillion by the time we get there. Let's see here now. The original House bill included elimination of all the IRS funding for the new Stasi, the IRS agents, who will be a weaponized IRS force. Total savings would have been $71 billion. That was what passed out of the House, and no new agents to hassle Americans. The McCarthy-Biden proposal is to prevent hiring of the force next year, not permanently, for savings of roughly $2 billion. And Republicans will have to fight to prevent the hiring of the agents a year from now. But even that is disingenuous, isn't it? Because that $71 billion was pre-authorized. That was pre-authorized. So when you throw the $2 billion out, that doesn't mean that they can't hire agents this year. It just means on the back end, they'll have $2 billion less than that $71 billion. The original House bill included rescissions of Green New Deal tax credits and subsidies, which largely benefit rich individuals and corporations. It's rumored that Bill Gates is one of the biggest recipients. And that original bill was going to give $200 billion in savings. But the McCarthy-Biden program continues the Green New Deal boondoggles. The House bill originally eliminated Biden's student loan forgiveness and restructuring plan for projected savings of more than $400 billion. The McCarthy-Biden plan? No. The spending levels frozen at 2022 rates in the original House legislation are modified up. It isn't the 2022 in this bill. It's between 22 and 23 numbers. And Republican members of Congress are told that we'll fight these issues. We'll fight them again next year. In the meantime, the McCarthy-Biden plan assures an increase in the national debt of at least $4 trillion. How come it is that Republican leaders always tell us, next year we'll fight hard? Next year we'll fight hard. We really mean it next year. In fairness, the McCarthy-Biden plan asserts something that they call administrative pay-go. It ostensibly requires bureaucrats to demonstrate how they're going to pay for new programs or increases in spending. Now that sounds good, right? Except Congress has had a similar program for many years without it slowing down spending a bit. And why is it? Because Congress waives pay-go provisions. Yeah. Now here's the way the pay-go provisions are going to be waived here. This part, by the way, this program sunsets in a year. But this part, and this crazy, is that the director of OMB can waive the pay-go provisions whenever and for whatever reason. You know what? There's a reason that the Biden administration has no concern over this provision at all. Because they control the OMB and the OMB director. And that unicorn, the admin pay-go, is where most of the McCarthy-Biden savings of $1 trillion is supposedly coming from. And since that is ephemeral at best, the McCarthy-Biden savings totally evaporates. Another point that the McCarthy-Biden coalition supports disincentivizes the commitment to pass 12 appropriation bills as promised in January. That automatically creates a continuing resolution with a 1% reduction. But since you're actually moving spending up, you're not really going to see a true savings there. But beyond that, they're going to wait before this gets imposed until 3 months into the next fiscal year. That is not what Representative Massey's plan really was. And when Republican leaders put out their talking points, they said that the Democrats got nothing in this deal. The question is, what did Republicans get in this deal? As progressive Democrat Pramila Jayapal stated, it doesn't cut spending and doesn't reduce the deficit. So what did Republicans get? I can't answer that. McCarthy-Biden proposal doesn't stop or even slow down deficit spending. It doesn't reduce the angle of trajectory of our out of control growth of our nation's debt, and the McCarthy-Biden proposal doesn't bend the spending curve down. Instead, they put some curtains on a dilapidated budget house and hope that that will dress it up enough so enough Republicans will vote for it so they don't feel too doggone bad when 150 Democrats vote for it. The McCarthy-Biden plan keeps us moving over the national debt cliff with the Republican leadership's mantra of, we'll fight it next year. I thought the last plan wasn't good enough. I had no idea that we would see a plan as ephemeral and as malodorous as this plan. I am going to vote no. I urge my colleagues to vote no. And with that, I'm pleased to turn this over to my good friend from South Carolina on the Rules Committee, Mr. Norman.
Thank you, Andy. I want to thank all of my members behind me that have got the courage to stand up and say no to this bill. Folks, the two factions that are supporting this bill, China, because they're just buying more debt to control America, and the Biden administration, which, as the hearings are showing, is corrupt and compromised to China. And we want to add the credit cards to give him to spend our money, and as has been said, unlimited debt ceiling and extend it through January of 2025. That's insanity. Who would do that? And I'm tired of hearing, as Andy says, we'll do it tomorrow. I'm tired of hearing, well, the Senate's not going to pass it. I'm tired of that. I'm not in the Senate. The House, the reason the Democrats got kicked out in January is because they wanted a change. They wanted a conservative change. This bill does nothing to that. If nothing else, if you examine the bill, the existing debt that we've got is $32 trillion and counting. To give you a concept, $1 trillion at 3% is $30 billion. $1 trillion. The interest on the debt is going to exceed our military budget if we keep going the way we're going. Somewhere, somebody has got to stop it. This group behind me is willing to do that. I'm on Rules Committee. It's a great committee. We know everything coming through. But folks, if we can stop it there, I will stop it. There is a reason why 100 Democrats, none of which voted for our initial bill, is now for it. Why is that? It's because they got what they wanted. And Kevin McCarthy had done a good job speaking the language. His #1 slogan is national debt is the biggest threat we have to America. That's out of his words. And then to pass this bill, folks, it's time to go back to the drawing table. It's time for us to say no. And look, I don't buy Janet Yellen's "the sky's falling." She's moved the X date 3 times. June 1st, now it's June 5th, and I hear it's June 8th. What gives? Tax revenues are going to be coming in. We're not going to default. We're going to choose. They're going to say this. Let's call their bluff on it. The best deal is no deal. The time you get up and walk away from the table was when Biden spent 97 days dithering in Japan and God knows where else he went. And now all of a sudden, at the last minute, it's an insult to get a 100-page bill and be asked to decide on it on the spot. I won't buy a microwave unless I get it in writing. And here we are at the last minute. No, it doesn't make sense, folks, for any of you. Once you dissect the bill, this bill is un-American. It defies conservatism. No Republican in good conscience should support this. And go back to the drawing table. Let's go back. And if we're going to negotiate does not mean completely evaporate, completely dismiss the things that we passed with 218 votes. And I just want to thank my comrades behind me, and I wish other people will. And when you see the preview of coming attractions as Democrats passing this bill, that should tell you something. I call on, is Matt Rosendale or Andrew Clyde? Andrew.
Thank you, Ralph. To my good colleague from the Carolinas, the Biden-McCarthy deal has been dubbed the Fiscal Responsibility Act. But in truth, there's nothing responsible about it. Make no mistake, this is the Fiscal Irresponsibility Act. For starters, it egregiously provides an unlimited, nearly 2-year debt ceiling increase until January 2025. So we have a date, but we don't have a dollar figure. So the federal government can spend unlimited amounts of money, your hard-earned tax dollars, until that date. Then they can plus up their cash on hand to normal operating levels at the end of it by at least $4 trillion, maybe $4.5 trillion. We don't know yet because there's no top number. Keep in mind, we're currently barreling toward $32 trillion in debt. The American people charged us with reducing this figure, not recklessly raising it at the whim of Joe Biden, whose big government socialist agenda has broken our economy, racked up tremendous debt, and burdened Americans with soaring inflation. For a long time, Speaker McCarthy has claimed that, and I quote here from February 1 of this year, the greatest threat to America is our debt. And I'd agree with them, but this agreement drastically increases the threat to America. Yet it includes almost zero cuts, clawbacks, or reforms that we fought for in the Limit, Save, Grow Act. Just take the IRS funding as an example. And this issue is personal for me because I was a victim of the weaponized IRS back in 2013. Despite claims that this disastrous deal eliminated funding for Joe Biden's auditing army of IRS agents, the bill text doesn't lie. In reality, the agreement cuts less than $1.4 billion. As a reminder, we promised the American people, the very first bill that this Republican Congress passed, that we would repeal the $80 billion that the Democrats appropriated to the already bloated IRS last year. We promised American taxpayers that we would protect them from increased and targeted audits. We promised the nation that this would be a top priority under a House Republican majority. This deal breaks those promises. Because after this deal, they still have over $78 billion to spend from now till 2031, hiring tens of thousands of IRS agents. So instead of 87,000, they might get 86,000 IRS agents, and they can do that tomorrow. The money is still available right now. But it doesn't stop there. No Reins Act. It upholds Joe Biden's student loan transfer scheme. Nothing for border security. It only reclaims $28 billion of unspent COVID funds, but that doesn't even go back to pay off our debt or to the Treasury. And the list goes on and on. But simply put, this isn't a win for the American people. It's a win for Washington. And I didn't come to Washington to maintain the swamp status quo or to rubber stamp some fiscally irresponsible deal. My constituents didn't send me here to exacerbate the debt, burden future generations, capitulate to the establishment, turn a blind eye to the less destructive policies, or surrender the fight to eliminate woke, weaponized, and wasteful spending. They sent me here to fight for them, to fight to restore fiscal sanity to this broken government, and to fight for the future of our republic. I'm a hard no on this fiscally irresponsible insanity, and I urge more courageous and fiscally responsible Republicans to join me in that hard no. Now I'd like to turn it over to my friend from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Am I next? Very good. Thank you. I'm Dan Bishop from North Carolina. And I want to make sure I'm pithy here, so you guys don't just have to listen to, because these guys have covered it pretty well. But it's not just that every Republican should vote against this. It's a little bit more than that. This is a career-defining vote for every Republican. All of you guys know that thus far in this Congress, the dynamic force in Washington has been the unified House majority. The fact that we resolved in January on concrete details how we were going to go forward together. And it has been impactful over the first several months of Congress. Imagine the decision of Kevin McCarthy and his negotiators to forfeit that. Imagine that. Why would you give that up? Can you imagine doing it in the middle of a negotiating process without at least putting us all in a room to hash out, or representatives from our several groups among the Republican conference who've gotten together before? Can you calculate the cost of surrendering that advantage? But maybe worse. You know, in Washington, I thought the least present quality was courage. But I'm afraid truth tops that. This bill, as others have given you detail on, is chock full of cosmetic things, artificial things, things that actually have been outright lied about, misstated, like the change to IRS funding. In every supposed get for the Republicans, they are chock full of cosmetics. But the hard and cold reality, and again, there's not a member here who can tell you exactly what the increase in the debt will be. We just know the timing that it has been moved out. People said, actually, Kevin McCarthy said the Democrats didn't get anything in this bill. Who do you think wanted the maximum length extension of the debt ceiling and to make it undefined so nobody can pin it down? It may be $6 trillion. I always think it's useful to say, do you know what a trillion is? Do the American people are they capable of evaluating? You know what a trillion is? Somebody told me, I think it's about right, is a trillion is $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. So at $31.4 trillion, you're talking about every one of us walking around with a $250,000 extra mortgage. $4 trillion more will take that up $32,000 over the course of 2 years. And what does the device of 2 years do? It removes the issue from the national conversation during the presidential election to come. How could you more successfully kneecap any Republican president than to take that issue out of his or her hands? That's what's being done. So now let me tell you what has to happen from this point forward. Every one of the people standing here are those people who had the courage and were prepared to be the truthful ones to stand up in January and contest the Speaker election in order to get that agreement that unified the Republicans, that allowed the Republicans to pass a bill with 218 votes when they told us we could never do it. These people did that. There are other men and women of courage and honesty in the Republican conference. Some of them have come out in the last hours. Corey Mills, Nancy Mace, Mike Waltz, I just saw. Wesley Hunt. Many more need to emerge. If there is any path to salvaging what we began as a unified conference, if there is any path to that, this bill, if it passes, must pass with less than half of the Republican conference. That is the challenge. And it is no longer, look, we're prepared to stand up and take the slings and the arrows. We're prepared to tell you the truth. We're prepared to act in courage and honesty to the American people. It falls to my other colleagues who have not joined us before. This is the moment now. A colleague's words ring in my ears from a conversation last night. Only in Washington would anybody spend any time quibbling over the $12 billion cut, or is it maybe $20 billion, or is it fake entirely because you're holding $22 billion of COVID money and new funds at Commerce Department to use to repurpose for other spending? All that crap. What the American people all get. Now look, there's some people who are, I understand they're on the left, they think debt and spending is the way to go forever. Most Americans, 60% of it, right, it's the AP poll. 60% said they wanted cuts to spending in conjunction with changing the debt ceiling. Because they all know it is on a cataclysmic, unsustainable path. And so what they know is, look, they didn't want our bill, right? The $1.5 trillion increase, let's be honest about it. They go, why would you do that? Because that bill had an articulable path that we embarked on. It would take many phases, by the way, but we could eventually turn this place and get to back to a politics of sanity. Not this. The only thing we get here is tokenism, a token, artificial, fake, nothing benefits, and you don't even need to talk that long as I have to Americans for them to understand $4 or $6 trillion in debt growth. That is insane. So, to my colleagues in the Republican conference, you have a few hours to make up your mind. You are the key to our being able to reacquire the unity. Now, it's going to take some steps, by the way, because the leadership decision to forfeit that is going to have to be dealt with. I yield to my friend from Florida. I've sort of made a career. Hang on. Oh, are you going next?
I'm next.
Oh, I introduce Byron Donalds everywhere I go, but today I'm going to introduce Bob Good of Virginia.
Thank you. I won't claim to be pithy. I will be pithy, though. This year, we came into the year with a record $31 trillion national debt for the first time in the history of the country. We also came into the year with a new Republican majority, promising we would be different, running on fiscal responsibility, running on balancing the budget. And yet, what was the Democrat position on the debt ceiling battle? Was an unlimited debt ceiling increase with no conditions. That was the Democrat position back in January. We had a speaker battle back in January, and that battle flowed out of two components. Number one, past history where Republican leadership, when we had the majority, passed major spending packages with a majority of Democrat votes. I predict that will happen tomorrow night. The other part of that challenge, leadership challenge, was a failure to use every tool at our disposal to effectively fight to stop the radical left agenda, to stop the Biden agenda. We've had 2 years of the most amount of spending in the history of the country, $10 trillion in new spending for the first 2 years of administration, first time that's ever happened. The Republican majority came together, despite the predictions of failure, and passed the Limit, Save, Grow bill. Most of us, if not any of us, had ever voted for a debt ceiling increase before. We didn't want to increase the debt ceiling at all. We wanted to cut spending so much we would never have to do it. But we came together with the provisions of the Limit, Save, Grow bill to raise the debt ceiling by a responsible $1.5 trillion in exchange for some $5-6 trillion of cuts over time. Then, while we were not participating, without the participation of the Republican body, you have our own leadership come together and jettison, dismiss all the provisions of the Limit, Save, Grow bill and come up with what the Democrat position was 3 months earlier. Raise the debt limit with no conditions. This deal makes default more likely in the future. A true default is when you can no longer borrow, you can no longer service your debt, you can no longer meet your obligations, and this deal makes it more likely with a $3 to $4 trillion increase over the next year and a half. Every Republican should oppose it. No Republican should vote to validate, affirm, and own Biden's agenda. And that's what this bill does. We inherited the Biden agenda back in January. We have determined, or declared at least, we would fight against it, we would stop it, we would reverse it, and instead a Republican vote for this bill is a vote for the Biden agenda to keep it level over the next 2 years and increase the national debt by some $3 to $4 trillion. Every Republican should vote against it. And now I'll turn to Byron Donald from Florida.
So first things first, to the American people, Washington is doing it again. While you were celebrating Memorial Day, all of our men and women who gave their lives for this great nation, and you were spending time with your family and your friends, this town was cutting another crap deal that's going to put you more in debt with no real changes whatsoever. So the American people need to understand full and well, do not listen to the talking points. Do not listen to the cool phrases that are being thrown out in commercials on CNN or Fox or MSNBC, because Washington is lying again. This bill has no cap in raising the debt, just a date in the future. We have no idea what that number is going to look like. Some people are saying $4 trillion. Some people are saying $3.5 trillion. This bill in year one might cut $12 billion if you just want to be generous. So who here thinks it's cool to cut $12 billion in exchange for $4 trillion? I don't think that's cool at all. This bill actually keeps the Biden baseline intact for the federal agencies. The Republicans in Congress have been saying for months that we need to get back to pre-COVID spending levels. This bill canonizes post-COVID spending levels brought to us by Joe Biden and the Democrats. This bill keeps all of Joe Biden's policy, all of Joe Biden's spending intact. This bill does nothing for the Green New Deal subsidies that are going to cripple our electric grid. So when Americans are trying to figure out that they went and bought this electric car that they were subsidized to buy, but when they plug it in, there's not enough electricity on the grid, that is because Washington subsidized all these Green New Deal projects and nobody stood up to it except for people standing behind me right now. To my Republican colleagues, do not vote for this bill. I'm telling you right now, your voters back home are going to look at you and say, why did you vote for a bill that keeps all of Joe Biden's policy in place and all you did was raise the debt ceiling? They're going to tell you, why did you not stand up and demand that they go back to the table and renegotiate this deal? These negotiations happened. Listen, in negotiations, you go through it, you figure out what comes out the other side. But now it's time for the Republican members of Congress to weigh in on these negotiations. That is why I am a no. That is why the men and women behind me are no's. That is why more and more Republicans, as they read this bill, they are no's. And I will add this last thing. It's funny that the White House's talking points are very cheery. That the White House is telling Democrats, have crocodile tears, but vote for the bill. It's funny that you have 100 Democrats who are now greenlighting they will vote for this bill. You know why they're going to do that? Because none of their policy is changed and they get to keep all of their spending. And last but not least, if we were going to do something constructive for the country, if Joe Biden didn't want to get rid of his crazy Green New Deal spending, the least we could have done is secure the southern border. And we didn't do that either. To my Republican colleagues, vote no. Vote no and do the right thing. And let's go find a better deal.
Cloud.
Sorry, Cloud, I didn't even introduce you. I apologize.
Michael Cloud, Texas.
Hey, Michael Cloud from Texas, 27th. This nation is racing toward a fiscal cliff. That's not news to anyone here. But for too long, Republicans have bemoaned the left as they race toward a fiscal cliff and called it success when we jog toward that same cliff. And indeed, this was a big part of the discussions leading into this term A lot of what got characterized as the speaker's fight was also an internal discussion about who we were going to be as a conference coming into this term, what things we were going to stand for. And a number of us got up and said, I'm not here to fill a seat. I'm not here to play Congress, and I will not settle for anything less than turning the corner on this and putting us in the right direction. This deal does not do this. This deal plays the same fuzzy math, shell game, fiscal games that this place has played for years to use the American people as collateral to build a $31 trillion debt. This deal, as all the talking points have said, you've heard today, you know, when we put a debt ceiling out there, we don't even have the courage to put an amount on it, but instead we put it on a date in the middle of a lame duck session so that the American people will not be able to speak to it in the next election right before another president is elected. That's swampy games. This kind of stuff has got to stop. We've got to do what we said we were going to do. It's very simple. When you come to Washington, you do what you say you're going to do. If you say you're going to get rid of 87,000 agents, you do it. You don't play a shell game with it and say you're not going to do it. This bill, at best in the outcome, funds the same leftist, woke, weaponized government at 99% of the massively inflated 40% growth we've seen over the last two to 3 years of this government, at best. And so we have Republicans who will come and they'll campaign on, we're going to get rid of this government that targets teachers at school board meetings. We're going to get rid of the spying on American citizens. We're going to get rid of the policies that ignore the law. We're going to secure our border. Well, you can't do that if you disincentivize the appropriations process and take away the tools we have to get rid of stuff. You know, on the Appropriations Committee, we've been going through this thing for the months, looking for all this crazy spending. Do you know our cafeteria here pays an NGO to consult on our use of plastic straws? Wow. That is how ridiculous this government has grown in putting a burden on the taxpayers. Flip a coin, use paper straws, use plastic straws. I don't care, but let's not be funding this on the backs of taxpayers. This kind of craziness has got to stop. This nation cannot stand one more generation of politicians in D.C. who are willing to go out and win the messaging war, but fail to secure real reforms that secure the blessings of liberty for this next generation. We've got to stand. We've got to hold the line. The American people deserve no less. And I'd like to invite up my friend and colleague from Texas, Mr. Keith Self.
Well said, Michael.
Yes.
Good job, Michael.
Well, it's starting to feel like my native Texas out here. So I'm going to keep this short because I have listened to my very eloquent colleagues here. I have renamed this bill the Sleight of Hand Spending Bill. Something that's not been discussed here, so I won't rehash old ground here, but we've been very proud of the work requirements.
Yes.
In this bill, we have temporary work requirements, but we've added permanent new exceptions. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a sleight of hand. With that, I yield to the chairman, General Perry.
Thank you all. We're going to take questions, but to sum it up, look, what this bill does is underwrite for the rest of the 2 years the woke weaponized by the administration and all their policies, and Republicans should not be responsible for that and should not play a part in it. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Terry. Jack Smith with Times. Were the bill to go forward, would you file a motion to vacate the chair?
Look, we are focused. I'll let each member speak for themselves. But for me, I am focused on defeating this bill. What happens post that and the agreements that we have, we will decide once we've determined the disposition of this bill and its finality. Yes, ma'am.
What's your message to some Americans who might be more worried about a potential default?
We are not going to default. We are taking in record revenues. As a matter of fact, in the month of June, the biggest, because of the quarterly, the biggest glut of cash comes into the federal government. There was no chance of ever defaulting, not paying on our debt, not paying Social Security, not paying Medicare, not paying veterans benefits. That was never going to happen. This is a scare tactic. What this bill does is lead to an eventual complete default of the United States. That's what it does, and that's why we're opposed to it. Yes, ma'am.
Let me add to Chairman Perry's point on that. There were many other options available. So you could do, I mean, for a short period of time, you could do a clean a limit increase if necessary. This, what was decided upon, is the worst possible answer to that question.
Yes, ma'am. We don't look. We've asked for Janet Yellen's figures, and with all due respect, she comes with zero credibility to this discussion, right? She didn't see inflation coming. She didn't know that we were going to breach the debt ceiling when she supported the $1.7 trillion omnibus on December 23rd, passed by the Democrats. She's moved the dates multiple times. So we don't believe her figures. We've asked to see her figures. Nobody here wants to default. And I want to remind everybody here, these members and this side of the building voted to not default over a month ago. While we appreciate and respect that you're here listening to us, you need to go to the other side of the building and ask the Senate what they have done to avoid default instead of continually asking us. We passed a bill. That's what we did. Sir.
Mr. Chairman, can I jump in here real quick? And I just want to add one thing. Look, there are two paths here. Take up the bill that we passed. It's a good bill. It's sitting over in the Senate. They can pass it and send it to the president. Second, Speaker McCarthy should pull this bad bill down. We should stop taking this bill up right now. I don't think he even has a majority of his own conference at this point. We'll find out later today. He should pull this bill down, and then we should do exactly what we're doing right now. We have COVID rescissions right now. COVID rescissions are in the bill. COVID rescissions of $29 billion. They've already taken that in this bill, and they've swept $22 billion and just set it over to the Department of Commerce for play money. Take that money, take IRS money, and go tell Janet Yellen you're going to pay every bill you need to pay, and we're going to sit down at the table and do the job for the American people. But don't tell me you're going to put me over a barrel for $4 trillion because you refuse to do your job. That is what Speaker McCarthy should have told the President of the United States.
Yes, ma'am. We are dealing with the bill right in front of us. You can talk to these folks and anybody else you want to after this press conference individually. We're here having a press conference about the bill and the issue on the table. Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right.
We're blown away by that, Olivia.
Thank you all. It's been great to see you.